This is Commander William C. Spears from Washington, D.C., and you are listening to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast.
Welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast, a podcast dedicated to exploring the applied philosophy of traditional Stoicism. The College of Stoic Philosophers is an online school founded in 2008. We at the college endeavor to educate all who would be Stoics and Stoic philosophers who aspire to the good life within the world community. Podcast episodes will include discussions of Stoic history, application, interviews, and much more, all while having some fun, fate permitting. I'm your host, Mark Sterry. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. William C. Spears, welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. How's it going today there, William?
Hey, Mark, I really appreciate you having me on board. Really appreciate being here.
Yes, it's very nice to chat with you. It's interesting that your dad was a musician as well as I am and was a Hammond or is a Hammond organ fan. That is really cool.
Yeah.
So, William, how did you discover the College of Stoic Philosophers?
So the College of Stoic Philosophers, I didn't know about until I had been into Stoicism for a real long time. And I guess I just kind of stumbled across it whenever I realized that Stoicism had exploded as a popular movement, in kind of like the 2010s is whenever I figured that out. And I quickly found through the website, oh, hey, there's this podcast. And so, that was back when Chris Fisher had his Stoicism on Fire podcast, which I thought was excellent. And, I really enjoyed that. And, I'm not a member of the college. I think you can call me a friend of the college. I like what you guys are doing. And I really appreciate your reference-based approach. I think that that's very important to, know what the books actually say and what the original references say. And you guys are really serious about that. I think that's very good and very important. And, in the process of writing this book, I've reached out to some, members of the college and got a lot of help, got some feedback from some of your principals. That's been very helpful and kind of shaping the direction of things.
What's the example of some of the feedback you got back from some of our fellow college faculty?
Oh, just whenever you write a book, you got your draft and you have to have beta readers to get feedback on, hey, am I articulating this idea well? Does this metaphor make sense and things like that? So I had several members, beta read the book for me, and all the feedback was great. Hey, Will, this is really great stuff. But the way you say this right here, this sentence is awkward, and maybe, stuff like that. That's just a thing you do when you author a book.
Going through your book and your resources, it seems like such a monumental task to create something like this. So how long did it take to put this book together? I know you're still in the editing phase, but how long did it take to rough draft this thing?
Good grief, years. I've been working on this thing for so long, man. So, and that's a thing that, people because I'm an active Navy and, we're busy, we spend a lot of times at sea. I'm certainly not doing any of this while I'm on a ship, but it's something I kind of got started probably about 10 years ago and started saying like, man, someone needs to write this book. And I kept waiting for expecting someone else to do it. And I was like, I'm just going to, can I do this? And it just kind of eventually gave myself permission to do it. And then I've just been picking away at it for years. And I really started accelerating on it in the last few years. So like the first several years of things that I wrote, like none of that still remains, but all that was a necessary part of the process to, do the research and dig stuff up and figure out what I was trying to say.
And what was your writing process like? Did you come up with like an arc, what you wanted to do, beginning, middle, and end, and came up with stuff that you wanted to highlight? Or what was your process like? How did you sit down and do it?
So the overall vision changed, over time. And I think that's how it works whenever you write books, and I hope it's not the last book I write, but it's definitely the first. And so I didn't really know how much it would change. And so I was really intimidated by that. I can't really think of what direction it's going to go. Well, heck, let me just write the first chapter. And like that first chapter is long gone. The second chapter is long gone. But the research that opened the door to say, hey, you know what, maybe these ideas connect together, right? And, maybe this will, become and like the overall shape and the arc of the story I was trying to tell or how to explain Stoicism, like that evolved dramatically over time. And it changed. Most of the changes happened in like the last couple of years that I've been working on it.
What sort of ideas or concepts in Stoicism were you unsure about when you were started writing the book and you had to really dig in and iron out what you really thought about?
So the basic gist of the book, like what the book is the theories of just war, morality, looked at through a Stoic lens. And what it started off as seeking to answer, the question it was seeking to answer is, hey, is military service really compatible with Stoic philosophy? Do those things truly go together? I discovered Stoic philosophy through a military hero of mine who's very heroic, within the Navy, very very celebrated, and that's Vice Admiral James Stockdale. And like I discovered this while I was at the Naval Academy as a student. I was an enlisted guy for a few years in the Navy. I just kind of joined right out of high school, as a lot of people, from backcountry towns do. And I was a small town Louisiana, and joined the Navy. But within a few years, I found myself at the Naval Academy, really like, hey, I'm out of place here. I'm not supposed to be here, and as one feels whenever you find yourself in Annapolis and, from a small town. And very quickly started saying like, who's the legacy here? Who are the people to study? And, discovered Stockdale quickly. And, his story is very, very interesting, but, late in his life, he started really getting vocal about this weird Greek philosopher named Epictetus. Well, who's ever heard of Epictetus? And getting into that, it just hit me like a ton of bricks of like, oh wow, this is really profound, really deep, and kind of went through several years of just really digging into them deeply. But it was like this private thing. It was just kind of this thing in between myself and Admiral Stockdale. And not that I ever met him. He passed away after in the my first year at the academy. But it was this deeply personal thing. And then I went on with my career as a submarine officer in the Navy, and went to sea, and just got really busy, and all that kind of stuff took a back seat. And then I came off that first tour on a submarine, and I'm on shore duty. Now I'm in grad school. I've got some bandwidth, and I'm writing on leadership and writing on just trying to collect my thoughts. And then I discovered that, holy crap, there's this just explosion of interest in Stoicism online. And there's everything from, really good stuff to just really bad stuff, and everything in between. A lot of misinformation, a lot of silliness, a lot of, but a lot of really good thoughts too. And like, wow, this is really, really becoming a thing here. And I was noticing that there was online, there were all these debates over, hey, is this really conducive to the military service? Is this a thing? Is this truly compatible? And, there were some people who see it as like, oh, that's a perversion of Stoicism because the Stoics are cosmopolitans. So they would clearly not be on board with military service. And, I'm like, okay, hold on, let's figure that out. It seems to make sense that they would be on board with just war theory, but why? And that question of why and how would that work? How would the logic work? Really became very intriguing. Digging into Stoic morality, Stoic concepts of duty and consequentiality, and all those kinds of things led into a really deep investigation, and it made a book. I was expecting kind of any minute for someone to come out with a book of some Navy SEALs use Stoic, how to use Stoicism to be Billy Badass. And, you're waiting for that to happen. And thankfully it didn't yet. I'm anticipating it, but I kind of was hoping to get ahead of the game with, okay, well, here's what the book says,
Thank you for that. I am surprised that has not come out yet, though. Kind of a John Rambo version of a military with Stoicism. As far as I'm aware of, I haven't seen one.
Yeah, and I mean, it's got to be a matter of time. And publishers, and I've learned all about the publishing world and how they, and most of that I've learned in the last year, and how I'm extremely lucky to have found a publisher. It was hard. The book is weird, and publishers don't like weird. It's kind of what shelf does this go on? Is is this philosophy? Is this military? It's like, well, yeah, you know,
Self-help? I don't know. It's all kinds
yeah.
of stuff. Well, yes. Thank you for releasing this before some comic book version of Stoicism comes out with the
Yeah, and
military.
it's a matter of time. I mean the publishing world has figured out that if you can take a wet roll of paper towels and put a Navy SEAL on the cover of it, you can publish that. And so it's just a matter of time. But my approach to it has been kind of like part of being a submariner. I'm a nuclear submarine guy, and our philosophy with just organizational culture is, okay, your opinion is fascinating. That's great. What does the book say? Like we're not going to argue about how we've always done it or how the thing actually, works when you got to kick it twice and rub the belly of the Buddha figurine that's behind the thing to get the machine working. What does the book say? How does it work? What is the procedure? And that's just how we do it with everything. And that was just kind of my approach to this. Like, okay, we can argue about whether the Stoics would be on board with military service or not after we know what they actually say. And there's some ambiguity there, and there are some differences of opinions over the 500 years that they were writing. But I think I captured that.
While we're speaking of when it comes out, when is this book to be released to the masses?
Yeah, it comes out in the UK in September and the US in November 1. I don't know why there's a difference there. I think it has something to do with distribution networks. That's mysteries of publishing world. But it's the book's written, the cake is baked. I'm in the finalization of editing process, and that's just kind of where I'm proofing they took a lot of superfluous that's out and kind of cleaned up the language a little bit here and there, but the arguments are all there, and it's what you've seen.
I asked John Sellers this as well when he was on the podcast, but with the world of podcasts and things like that, would you ever consider, or are you considering, an audio version of your book?
That's up to the publisher. I would love to do it. I've already had several people people listen to audiobooks when they don't have time to read. And I mean, I do, I ride the bus into the Pentagon. I don't have time to read a book, but I've got time to listen. I can listen to a book while I'm running, while I'm working out and things like that. So I'd love to do that. Whether that would be me doing the reading or hiring a professional. You got to actually, like, there's training for that. Like, you can't just go read the book and expect it to be something someone wants to listen to, because you'll breathe into the mic and, you got to maintain your pace and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I don't know if I would have time to do that. I would love to, if that's, something that the publisher wants to do, but they've got to decide that. So that's something they're going to decide later.
I think now is a good time to read your book, your short paragraph book summary of
Sure.
Stoicism as a Warrior Philosophy. This book explores Stoicism as a practical and philosophical framework for modern warriors, emphasizing its relevance to resilience, leadership, and moral clarity, drawing on historic Stoic teachings and their modern applications. The text highlights the enduring value of philosophy in addressing challenges faced by individuals in high-stress environments, particularly within the military.
I think that captures it. Yeah.
So when you were writing this book, did it change in the process from then till now? Did your views of Stoicism change from your original interactions with it, learning about Stockdale?
Absolutely. I'd say it got a lot deeper. And what really happened is, early on, I didn't know what I didn't know. And you find this is one of those things you encounter over and over in life is I thought I got this thing and I really didn't. And, so when I was in college, I read a bunch of Seneca, and, I read Marcus Aurelius, cover to cover. I read the Enchiridion cover to cover, and then this and that of discourses. And I kind of thought I got it, and, Epictetus was of the three, though, he was my least favorite at that time, because he's harsh, he's kind of a jerk sometimes, and Seneca was the one that really resonated with me early on, because he's such a beautiful writer, and it's just soothing. His writing's just like warm bathwater. It just makes you feel good to read what he's thinking, and of course Marcus Aurelius. I mean, he's in Gladiator. What's not to love? but the coming back to it and saying like, okay, I thought I got Stoicism, but let me revisit this. And then very quickly I came to see like, okay, no, Epictetus is the man, and you kind of you have to put them together. Like all three of those of the Roman Stoics, you have to put them together, and they each show you a piece of the picture. But then, I discovered Cicero, who, he was not formally a Stoic, but much of his philosophy is very Middle Stoic, and kind of gives us what we know about the Middle Stoics. And then having to dig into the theory, that's whenever I learned what we do know about Chrysippus and Zeno and that crowd. And there was so much I didn't know about the early Stoics, and that kind of provided the theoretical foundation for the later ones.
How do you define a Stoic?
God, that's tough. So I, whenever I wrote the book, and you see it very early, in the introduction, and I'm establishing my terms and my assumptions. I define a Stoic as someone who, lived 2,000 years ago. And that is not to, I don't have a problem with anyone who calls themselves a Stoic today, but it's just a simplifying assumption so that whenever I'm writing, you know what I'm talking about. And so whenever I say Stoic, I mean ancient Stoics. And, for that reason, I don't call myself a Stoic. I don't know exactly what the necessary and sufficient conditions of a modern Stoic are, because there seems to be a lot of different opinions on that. And I don't know that anyone really has the authority to establish that. So I just stay out of that. Like the real question isn't, who's a real Stoic. The real question is, well, what's true? And, what do we actually think? And the fact is these ancient philosophers, they were human beings. They're not prophets. They're not gurus. And I think they would not want us to look at them that way. They would want us to think on our own and say like, okay, well, Epictetus said this, but I think he's wrong. If I think he's wrong about something, I definitely think that they were right about most of it. They were right about a lot more than they were wrong about. And they were a lot more right than a lot of other stuff that's out there. And, they're extremely valuable to know about. So anyway, so whenever I say Stoic in the book, I'm talking about ancient Stoics.
Okay. When you're putting together a book or a big project like this, and you're telling your beer buddies or family or whatever that you're writing a book on Stoicism, and what would be the biggest misconception about Stoicism?
I think it's the one that, Stoicism equals having no emotions, and it's the one that's, it's a horse that's been beaten a lot in all the online discourse of, Stoicism is about understanding your emotions. So I think that would be the first one, and we know that. I don't think we really need to beat that horse anymore. It's about understanding the processes of how emotions work or how we think they work. And, it's about virtue. It's about moral virtue is what it is from, beginning to end. Virtue is the sole good. And I mean, that is the keystone concept of the whole philosophy. So I would say that is the first misconception. The second one I'd say is, I'm gonna get 2 for 1 because you didn't ask me for 2, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. I think that it's some kind of kooky thing, that it's some kind of alternative religion or it's some new age thing. Like, I mean, it can be that you can treat it that way if you want, I don't. It's a framework, and it is philosophy. And the question isn't, what am I allowed to do if I'm going to be a Stoic? The question is, well, what do you think you should do? After you've read this and you've thought through these things, do you think they're right? Do you think they're wrong? What do you think you should do? That's what you got to figure out.
When I first joined the College of Stoic Philosophers, I was taught by the founder, Eric Wiegard, that the college is a place that produces living, practicing Stoic philosophers, as a training ground for Stoic philosophers. And one of our favorite writers is A.A. Long, we refer to a lot. And in one of my favorite books is his Stoic Studies, with that cool picture of Chrysippus, I think, on the front. He says in his introduction that he is not a practicing Stoic. And it kind of broke my heart. I'm like, he's not a practicing Stoic, and he's the guy we rely on all the time. And it took me a little while that he was looking at it at more of an academic point of view. So are you looking at Stoicism from more of an academic military point of view, or do you practice a lot of this stuff yourself? So you practice the philosophy?
So absolutely, I practice the philosophy plenty, but also I look at it from a academic point of view. I think those two things can coexist. I just eschew the label. I just don't. It just doesn't help me as much as it hurts. The book is written for me to be able to present to a general or an admiral and say, like, all right, sir, look, this is what this Stoicism thing is about. Here you go. And that's kind of how the book is written. Now, if I wrote it as like it's a religion or something, I wouldn't get anywhere with that. Like no one, everyone's going to say like, oh, okay, here's this kooky new age thing. Oh, neat. I'm like, no, look, this is what Admiral Stockdale was talking about, guys. And that was kind of the approach that he took of like, hey, this is a framework of prioritizing, virtue and a way of thinking about these things. And now Stockdale, he was completely focused on Epictetus. It wasn't that he wasn't aware of the other guys. I mean, the guy was extremely deeply read, but whenever he talked about Stoicism, he mainly talked about Epictetus because that was what was most relevant to his lived experience. So in a lot of ways, I'm hoping to kind of pick up where he left off and say, at the time that Stockdale was talking Epictetus at the Naval War College, there was no popular Stoicism movement to speak of, and really no one that he was speaking to had ever heard of any of this stuff. And it's a different world now. I think that the popular Stoicism movement, the rise of that, is a very big deal, and I think it's important for the military to understand that, because I think it goes, it's really hand in hand with the crisis in mental health that you have in this country and you have in all the advanced countries right now, and that's an extremely important thing to the military, and we have not got our arms around it yet. And so I think that the rise of a popular Stoicism movement is something that senior military leaders need to understand.
Speaking of the application of Stoic principles, can you give some examples of where Stoicism has helped you as your career as a nuclear submariner?
Sure. So it's not like this thing where I am, I'm there on my submarine and something terrible's happening and let me break out my Epictetus. What does he say to do here? It's not like that. It's more of a disposition that's a pattern of thinking that's well established over many years of thinking this way. And a thing that you'll hear a lot from military guys is they'll discover Stoicism and they'll say like, oh, well, I always thought this way. So it was kind of like I came into this philosophy that was already the way I thought, and that was the way I felt about it too. But when you scratch the surface of that a little bit, like, okay, so you thought that, virtue is the sole good and, everything's not, else is neither good nor bad nor indifferent. Did you believe in pneuma? You can scratch that until you're going to say, okay, maybe I wasn't into Stoicism. I just was into virtue, or I was just into, rationality. And really, to me, the first way I was able to articulate Stoicism to people who had never heard of it was it's kind of the intersection of rationality and virtue ethics. It's where those two things really come together, and that really resonates with military folks a lot.
Like, is there like concrete examples like this happened, you responded this way, and before Stoicism you may have responded a different way?
I would say as a pattern of thinking, the thinking of we do not have any control over that, so let's stop wasting time on it, is a very effective pattern of thought that you very much need to have. So on a submarine, whenever the whole ship is really ready to return to port, and people have weddings to go to, there's vacation tickets and all these things, and up, we're gonna remain on station for another few weeks, and everyone's plans are blown up. You haven't seen your kids for 6 months, and now it's gonna be that much longer, and that can send people a little bit loopy, and the idea of, hey, this is what we can control. This is what is going on, and everything else is not us. Everything else is beyond our control. This is what we're going to focus on, and that's what's going to be effective. So that's a pattern of thought that I think was very much reinforced by my readings of Epictetus. Another one that I think that was very effective, that's kind of lesser known, is how the role ethics works in the prioritization of roles and the prioritization of humanity and virtue over individual roles, and how that one informs the other. And that's kind of, I get into that a lot in chapter 4 when I'm talking about duty and moral obligation. But the idea of I'm going to be a human first, and then worry about the other things, and everything else is gonna sort itself out. That's had a lot of applications. I guess a good example of that was whenever I was a junior officer. I was responsible, as just a random collateral duty I had at that time was as the force protection officer of my ship. And so I owned all the administration having to do with physical security. And just as a random thing that was attached to that, if anyone wanted to take leave to visit a foreign country, there was this mountain of paperwork that we had to do to say that they were going to be safe. And it was right after the United States had killed Osama bin Laden, and so we were in a heightened state of physical security, just kind of across the whole force, and so that imposed some additional restrictions. And if you wanted to travel to a foreign country, it was a pain in the butt to do. And there was just all this extra training you had to do, all these extra authorities and signatures that you had to get, and approving people that had to go through this whole chain well outside of your ship. Well, I had this sailor on my ship who was married at the time to someone who lived in a foreign country, and she was unstable. And she was there with his kids, and she committed a suicidal act, and she was in the hospital, and it was this emergency thing, and it was Saturday morning, and he's I get the phone call of like, hey, the sailor has this incident, we need to get him on a plane to this foreign country, and it's like, there's no way that's going to get approved on time. But everything in me screamed like, we need to get this guy on a plane. His wife is dying. He's got kids in this country. Like, we need to get him there. And all these approval authorities, we're never going to get through all that. And so ultimately, I thought about it, and I thought, okay, what would a good officer do? What would a good human do? What would a good man do? And I signed his papers, and we got him on a plane. And I took an ass chewing for it later. That was not the 4.0 answer. The 4.0 answer was to get some more approvals and make some more phone calls and get it figured out. But we got it sorted out eventually, and that was very consistent. At the time, that was more informed by, that was before I really got into the role ethics piece of Epictetus. That was more informed by my dad, who had at some point told me, hey, when I'm conflicted and something to do with the job, and something with being a good man, I'm going to be a good man, and I'll let the rest sort it out. And I mean, that made perfect sense. But when you dig into Epictetus and you see where, he says, he opens a lot of lectures with, first of all, I am a human, and, consider first what you are. And that is a very deeply profound injunction, on his students. Consider first what you are. You have the faculty of reason, and don't forfeit that. Don't spurn that. There's a lot to that. There's very, very deep implications and obligations attendant to that faculty.
What is a warrior philosopher?
So, that kind of gets to the question of who is this book for? Because it is a very deep and dense book, and I've gotten that a lot from people who've said, like, well, this looks really academic. Like, you really think that people in the military are going to read this? And I say, yeah, I do. And so he says, so this is for someone who's in the military, but is really into philosophy like you are. And I said, yeah. So that's like 6 people. Like, no, actually, it's quite a bit more than that. It's not necessarily everyone in the military, but it's a lot more than you would think. Whenever you really deal with people who are in the military, you realize they're complex, they're extraordinarily creative, they're very, very talented, and they're a lot smarter than you often give them credit for. A warrior philosopher to me is somebody who is a warrior to start with, which I define as just as a simplifying assumption. I define that as someone who is in the military, and you could call it service member, but it doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. So and basically someone who is in the military who is possessed with the desire and the capability to think deeply. And that to me is either a warrior philosopher or an aspiring warrior philosopher, and that's who the book's for.
Folks that listen to this podcast are interested in Stoicism might be interested in your unique idea of the Stoic knife, which is kind of a different take on the dichotomy of control. Can you explain what the Stoic knife is?
Sure. That is. So and really the book was written to answer the question of, hey, is military service compatible with Stoicism? But I think that 90% of the book is really just explaining Stoicism, and I had to think through a lot of these concepts in a certain way to articulate them such that I could construct this argument about just war theory that kind of comes together in the final chapter. The Stoic knife was something that kind of dawned on me when I was trying to articulate the concept of prohoresis. And I don't know if I'm butchering how that's pronounced, because when you write and you read this stuff, you don't necessarily talk about it.
We say prohoresis.
That's how you say it?
That's
okay.
how I say it anyway. Prohoresis, yeah.
Yeah, that's how it reads to me. So for listeners who may not be attendant, or not be familiar with that, prohoresis is, the Epictetan concept of moral choice, and it's often translated in his writings as choice. But the what it means, in the popular blogosphere, you'll see this concept called the dichotomy of control, where there are things that I can control and things that I can't. It's the first line of the Enchiridion. It's deeply Epictetus's philosophy kind of orients around this concept, and that's a concept that resonates with a lot of people who are very new to Stoicism, and they come into it in this idea of things I can control and things I can't. Whoa, okay, that's so deep. I've got to not worry about the things I can't control, and it's kind of, you see that in the Serenity prayer from Alcoholics Anonymous, and it just feels philosophical. Okay. The term dichotomy of control was coined by William Irvine in his book. God, I don't remember what it was called, but it was a super popular book on Stoicism that came out in like the 2010s. It's kind of part of one of the on the forefront of the explosion of popular Stoicism. I think that it leaves a lot on the table. That concept of a dichotomy of control, of just being this either or sorting function, and I've got to not worry about what I can't control. What dawned on me when I was trying to articulate this concept is that this framework that Epictetus establishes works a lot like a philosophical razor. So a philosophical razor is basically a simplifying assumption examples are Occam's razor, which is like the simplest explanation is usually correct, or Hanlon's razor, which is, you don't attribute to malice what might be explained by stupidity. There's a whole set of them, and the idea is it's some kind of thumb rule that I can apply to shave off or cut off extraneous arguments or extraneous information, things that are not what I'm talking about right now, not relevant to what I'm trying to do or try to think about. And that is the way moral choice works for Epictetus. He treats it as a test for what is a moral factor and what is not. So if I were to articulate the Stoic knife as a philosophical razor in one sentence, I would say what is not up to us is not us. That is the Stoic knife. Okay, so what do I do with that? Why is this better than the dichotomy of control? Well, for me, it implies action, implies I've got to do something with this other than just not worrying about what I can't control. I've got to shave off or cut off things from my sense of what I am. So it starts with, health, wealth, reputation, all those things that we say, oh, those things are indifferent. Okay. Then you say, okay, well, companions, family, friends, like what? No, wait a second. No, your physical body, that's not you. It's like, what? And yeah, those things are indifferent. I have no power over those things. They can evaporate, they can fade, they can degrade right in front of me, they can defy me. And then ultimately you keep following it out. The past and the future are both, those things are not us. You cut those things off as well. And what you're left with is instantaneous moral choice, my agency, my will as a human being, my ability to make decisions. That is me and nothing else. And that is deeply invested in Epictetus's philosophy, but it's kind of an advanced concept, but I needed to find a way to explain that to be able to build on to the later concepts that get into just war and get into, moral obligation and things like that are also in the book.
And I noticed that you even applied it to the tricky, for the first-timer Stoic or Epictetus reader, when he talks about your child potentially dying in front of you, how you could apply the Stoic knife concept to that as well.
Yeah, so I talk about the death of a child deliberately to basically say what is the most challenging scenario I can come up with to say, okay, what would be the hardest situation for me to agree with Epictetus and say this thing is neither good nor bad nor indifferent. And I'd say that is my my child's life. And I think that personally that's kind of where I get to the point of I can say that, all right, maybe Stoicism isn't really helping me here, or maybe it doesn't capture this as well, but it's important to understand the theory, understand the concept. And if you can understand that concept, if you can accept that this is what Stoics claim, then you can understand the rest of it. And so that's why I use that example.
While we're in the heavy stuff here, I got a question. How do you reconcile Stoic cosmopolitanism with the evils and horrors of war?
That's like half the book.
How about a layman thumbnail answer?
Yeah. So it is. So being cosmopolitan is not the same thing as being a pacifist. I'll put it that way. And whenever you look at pacifism, you find that it very quickly, if you scratch past the surface, it gets into its own moral problems. It ends up with things like free riding or the deflection of moral burdens on others, or it fails to prevent, terrible things from happening where the willingness to use or to threaten force might prevent something much worse from happening. Pacifism didn't do anything for the, Rwandans in the 1994, genocide. So if you're not going to be a pacifist, then you have to be able to say, okay, what would be the conditions under which I would be willing to say we're going to kill people on behalf of the state, and it's going to be the right thing to do. And now you're in a just war theory. Okay. And it's not something anyone wants to talk about because it sounds really boring. It's stuff that, proportionality, just cause, last resort, all these concepts came out in the Middle Ages, and but if you trace them far enough back, you find that a lot of them trace back to Cicero. And he's kind of the seminal just war theorist, and he's a Stoic adjacent. But anyway, what that has to do with cosmopolitanism is that there are conditions where a moral person would agree to go to war, and where failure to go to war would be a morally deficient course of action for a cosmopolitan or any other.
Being a course developer for the College of Stoic Philosophers, I often find myself, when I've studied a bunch of Epictetus or a bunch of Marcus, I often find myself studying people that influence them. For example, like Zeno and Chrysippus, Cleanthes, when they came up with the Stoic idea of Stoic physics and Stoic God, I went and studied Heraclitus. That was super interesting. And for you, James Stockdale, what is a resource, or where could we learn, who is such a big influence to you, where could we go and learn more about him, a big influence of yours? Is there a documentary, a book? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I would just suggest read his essays online. That he's got books, Thoughts of a Philosophical Fighter Pilot and A Vietnam Experience are compilations of his essays. He's also got a big thick book called the In Love and War that was co-written with his wife Sybil Stockdale, that basically details his experience as a prisoner of war, from beginning to end. That's kind of your source if you really want to go deeply. But if you want to quickly get the flavor of it, especially for people who are just interested in Stoicism, if you go to the Naval Academy Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership website, you just Google Stockdale and Stoicism, you'll get the essays. They'll pop up. They're free, and they're basically there's 2 or 3 essays that he's written that are really recorded speeches that he's given on Epictetus, and that'll very quickly give you the flavor of how he applied the teachings of Epictetus while being the commander of the prisoners of war in Vietnam.
And now for the final ultimate question I've been waiting for 50 minutes to ask you. Was nuclear submariner Admiral Marco Ramius a Stoic?
Not
from Hunt from Red October, man. Tom Clancy.
Marco Ramius wasn't an admiral. He was just an awesome dude,
Was he? It was not admiral.
No, he was a captain.
He was Captain Marco Ramius. I'm already screwed that up.
Yeah, the romance schoolmaster. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is Tom Clancy's take on that life accurate at all?
The running joke in the submarine force is that the most accurate submarine movie is Down Periscope. I quibble with that. I think Hunt for Red October is probably the best one. Down Periscope is, it's funny. There's a lot of silliness in it that definitely resonates in the submarine force, but it's a little bit dated. The humor is a little bit dated if you go watch it today. Clancy he did his homework, and he discovered a lot of things that he probably shouldn't have, and he kind of freaked everyone out when he published that book because all that stuff is secret, and a lot of people wonder, like, where did you get this information? It was doing a lot of interviews with people who probably ran their mouth too much. The thing that's funny about Hunt for Red October to me is how much more complicated it is in real life than the movie depicts. There's this scene where, Jonesy, the sonarman,
I love Jonesy, one of my favorite characters.
Oh yeah, Jonesy's great. But there's a scene where he, marks this spot on the chart, and he marks another spot on a chart, and he draws a line, and they were there, and now they were there, and we think they're going to be here. And it was just like this profound, okay, so that's called dead reckoning. It's like the simplest thing you can possibly do with a navigational chart, like, oh, Jonesy, you figured this out, And I mean, the stuff that my guys had to, God, it would blow your mind. The kinds of stuff that the sailors were figuring out, and it would just bring a tear to your eye. Where they're using linguists, and they're using all kinds of different clues and signals and information that they get from different sources, and piece together a picture of what's going on that is just mind blowing. It's just the most beautiful thing.
Keeping lighthearted on it. Maybe you could do a version of Morse code of this book and have one ping only if you get it, and have a little quiz. One ping only.
Yeah.
All right. William C. Spears, thank you for being on the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. Your new book, Stoicism as a Warrior Philosophy, is coming out soon. What are your websites, social media handles, that kind of thing, if people want to follow you?
Yeah. So, I've got a website, williamcspears.com, and that's really just a spot for me to hang, ideas or thoughts. I got an essay on, I started a blog a few days ago, a few weeks ago, I'm sorry, that's got just a couple of posts, but I've got a pretty good little essay on Stockdale there that I like. So last Saturday actually was the 20th year anniversary of his passing. And so I wrote this essay as a tribute, and I shared it with, I'm in communication with the Stockdale family. His son has seen the book, and I've wanted to say, like, hey, I want to share this with you. I want to make sure that you think, I'm not talking about Stockdale a lot in the book, but I don't ever want it to be interpreted as me overstepping my bounds of or anything like that. And so, I ran it by Stockdale's son, and he's very much appreciated. Told me he really appreciates how it's represented, and how I've picked up from what his dad was teaching, and got as much as I could out of it, and I'm trying to share that with as many people as I can. Anyway, the essay that's on the website I think is good, and I think that it's relevant to our times.
Thank you for tuning in to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. Please visit the collegeofstoicphilosophers.org for information on the college, e-journal, and course offerings. Till next time, pro cop time.